Okay, today we need to talk about this WikiLeaks situation because we can't allow the release of classified information to threaten our national security and put our country at risk. Okay, we just can't have that. What? No, I'm saying that the official story from our government out of Washington is that WikiLeaks poses a threat to our national security. Its founder, Julian Assange, has been painted as a traitor. He's been labeled a terrorist. They say that he's worthy of death, and more than one official has called for his assassination. Amazon dropped his emergency web hosting. Even Visa and MasterCard cut business ties with him. But hey, this is still America, and even though you can't use Visa and MasterCard to send money to WikiLeaks, you can still use them to send money to the Ku Klux Klan. So if this is the official story, why can't we, for once, as good, responsible citizens, just get behind our government and believe what they're telling us? Okay, haven't they built this much credibility with us, throughout the years, building an outstanding reputation for always telling the truth, always standing for justice and freedom and democracy? Can't we just accept that WikiLeaks is bad? Our government wants to operate in secrecy. I say, what's wrong with that? What's the problem? They're only working on our behalf. We elected them to represent us, so they only want what's best for the citizens of the United States. I'm sure they're responsible enough, and I'm sure we can all trust them to do the right thing. I remember one of the early leaks that surfaced in 2010, and it showed a U.S. helicopter or gunship in either Iraq or Iran. I don't remember which one, but showed the U.S. helicopter gunship gunning down 7 civilians in cold blood, murdering them because the pilot had identified them as threats to our national security. And it turned out that 1 or 2 of them were journalists with either Reuters or the Associated Press. So, can you say war crimes? Somebody might want to say, hey, bring murder 1 charges against them. Somebody might say, no, not murder 1, maybe manslaughter. If not manslaughter, certainly criminally negligent homicide. But the response from our government was not prosecution. It was to cover it up and hide it from the American people. Then there are the documents that came out more recently that exposes our government's intent to destabilize the democratically elected government of Zimbabwe. Here's a nation of people that fought so hard and finally succeeded in toppling the apartheid regime of Rhodesia. That here's our government, good old Uncle Sam, organizing against the will of the people of that sovereign democracy. So this should come as no surprise to any of us, because of the documents that also exposed our failed attempt to overthrow Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela, in 2002. In accordance with reports, the United States government organized a coup against Chavez, successfully installed a puppet government, puppet dictatorship, so that we could have access to the 3rd largest oil reserves in the world. But within 24 hours, the will of the people of Venezuela raged against the coup. Within 24 hours, restored Chavez to power, spelling defeat for American imperialism. Then there's the document that shows our government's position towards the democratically elected president of Bolivia, Evo Morales. Position number 1 was to co-opt him, which means, of course, to buy him off. Position number 2 was to marginalize him, or paint him as a terrorist, as an extremist idiot, so that nobody in the international community would pay attention to him. And our 3rd option was to neutralize him, which of course means to destabilize his government and have him assassinated. So do any of these leaks that we've talked about so far, that I've mentioned, do any of these leaks pose a threat to our national security? Or does it show our government's unenlightened foreign policy when it comes to Latin America? So as I look through some of the documents, some of the leaks that have come to light so far, I'm not seeing our government's position substantiated. I'm not seeing this threat to our national security in the WikiLeaks documents. Now, if, for example, they had leaked the name of an undercover FBI agent, DE agent, or something to that effect, how would you feel about that? I certainly wouldn't have, had a very good feeling about that. That definitely would have presented a clear and present danger to the agent that was exposed. But one of the things that I can appreciate about WikiLeaks is that they are purposely avoiding the use of names of any type of field operatives, any types of soldiers out in the field, and so anyone whose life might be placed in jeopardy, they are avoiding doing that. To call a man a traitor doesn't make any sense because he's not even a citizen of the United States. But if a citizen of the United States had revealed the name of, let's say, an undercover CIA operative, yeah, I would consider that to be an act of treason, an act of sedition, and I would understand people were calling in that case for a firing squad to be assembled. People in other countries sometimes make fun of us in the USA. They say that USA stands for United States of Amnesia. So allow me to take you back to 2003, when our government revealed the name of an undercover CIA officer named Valerie Wilson as retaliation for an article that appeared in the New York Times entitled "What I Did Not Find in Africa." So the article basically showed that the United States' claims of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq were false, and that Saddam Hussein never tried to buy uranium in Africa. So Vice President Cheney was all up in arms about this. He didn't exactly have a warm, fuzzy feeling about the article because he's a serious warmonger, and he was building his case to invade Iraq at that time. So he made arrangements to leak Joseph Wilson's, that's the guy who wrote the article, he made the name to leak his wife's true identity. Okay? Now follow the logic, follow the superior intelligence of our leader here. He felt that by leaking the name of this man's wife, that would discredit the article that the man wrote, and they also made a case that Valerie Wilson helped the husband obtain that assignment that enabled him to go to Africa and investigate those claims. So this is the intelligence of these fools that are running our government, where, okay, so what? The wife helped him get the gig, but you have to refute the contents of his article. So instead of refuting the contents of his articles, which you couldn't do because the whole world knows now that our government was lying, so instead of doing that, you commit treason, you commit sedition, and put the life of his wife in peril. To this day, she's in danger of being killed by terrorists, because what terrorist wouldn't want to kill a present or former CIA officer? So the end result of all of this is that Cheney's chief of staff, Scooter Libby, had to take a fall. So in 2007, he was sentenced to 30 months in jail, 2 years probation, and $250,000 in fines. Okay. Also, in 2007, after the sentencing, President Bush intervened and undermined the justice that had been meted out by our courts. He commuted Libby's sentence so that Libby never spent a single day in jail. So that these three treasonous criminals, the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, and the Vice President's Chief of Staff, to this day, none of them have spent a single day in jail for what can only be called a felony act of treason, sedition, and conspiracy. And so I have to conclude that our government is not upset with WikiLeaks because WikiLeaks is somehow posing a threat to our country's national security. On the contrary, I'd say that our government is upset with WikiLeaks because WikiLeaks exposes the contradiction between the image that our government tries to project of itself internationally, and that is that it is the defenders of freedom and democracy, and what it actually is, which is a criminal enterprise run by murderous intellectuals that practice predatory capitalism and are only masquerading as the legitimate government of the United States of America. And I say that they're masquerading because they're failing to represent the will of the American people. So to see WikiLeaks in its proper context, we have to remember the Tuskegee experiment, and we have to remember that that human experiment only stopped because it was exposed through a leak. The Tuskegee experiment, for those of you not familiar with it, 700 black migrant farm workers in the 1930s injected with the syphilis virus and then studied like lab rats over the next 40 years as they infected their girlfriends, infected their wives, gave birth to deformed children. Some of the farmers went blind. Some of them went insane. Most of them died. And even in the 1950s, after penicillin was discovered and known to be a cure for syphilis, that treatment was withheld for the participants of this experiment, for the victims of this experiment. And this was an experiment carried out by the United States government under the auspices of the National Institute of Health, which has since changed its name to the CDC, Center for Disease Creation. Oops, my bad, Center for Disease Control. We have to remember that Watergate was exposed through a leak, which exposed the criminal acts of President Nixon. Okay, that only came to light because of a leak. We have to remember that the Pentagon Papers, which exposed the truth and the lies that our government was involved in terms of Vietnam. And one of the things that came out of the Pentagon Papers that I still remember is that when Ho Chi Minh committed his life to freeing his nation from the colonial oppression of the French, the first country that he approached for assistance was the United States. His only concern was that our government might not want to get involved because they would look at his country as too small and insignificant. So how wrong he was on that point. But never in his wildest dreams did he imagine these so-called defenders of freedom and democracy joining on the side of the French against his just cause, and then actually replacing the French and carrying on this unjust war for so many more years. So I see WikiLeaks as part of this tradition.